So again, welcome. This is a live event on Insight Timer on letting go of the life you thought you'd have. And we're going to be talking about a form of grief that we often don't talk about, but is incredibly important. And we all experience it. And yet most of us don't know what to do with it. And it festers and it creates problems for us down the road, blocks us from becoming the person we want to be, from having the life that we want to have moving forward, keeps us mired in the past. So I think it'll be very useful and will resonate with a lot of you. I love to have an active chat, so this can feel more like a conversation, um, and we can have a nice back and forth. So if you feel comfortable, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if at any point you have a question or you want to make a comment or something resonates with you or you're confused or you want to push back, pop it in the chat and we'll talk about it. Okay. And I'm here just outside of Boston. I have a beautiful view of the harbor and the skyline, and it's a nice day out. It's cold, but it's in the 30s, but it's sunny and beautiful. Sunny and beautiful. So, anyways, thank you for joining. And hi to Lisa in South Texas. Been a long time since I've been in South Texas, 30 something years. More than that. Wow. Yeah, more like almost 40. Wow. Okay. So, what we're talking about today is a form of grief that isn't about like a person dying, right? Which is often when we think about grief, it's a person or a pet um, passes, and we go through a grieving process. And even there, I do work with people on this, and it's amazing that people think there's a right or wrong to grieving, and there's a certain time period for grieving, and the answer is it really isn't. It's different for every person every time. Um, and and so even that, you know, type of grief that we're used to talking about to some extent, we actually don't understand it very well and often don't know how to handle it ourselves or handle it when we're dealing with somebody else who may be grieving. Um, but this is a little bit different. It's almost like different ways in which you can lose a version of your life, either um, a life or a part of your life that you've had up to a certain point, or an idea or a dream or a vision that you had for your life that was never realized, or you realize now might not be realized, can't be realized moving forward, right? And there's lots of different ways this can pop up. Um, it's hard to recognize sometimes that we need to grieve because oftentimes there's no like pinpoint like tragedy or moment. Sometimes there is, like if you get a divorce, that can be this kind of grief, and yet a lot of times there isn't, right, which makes it harder. And maybe it's you wake up in your 30s or 40s or 50s and realize your career didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to, right? I deal with a lot of people as a coach who find themselves in that situation, right? Just things feel wrong, or they always held out hope that things would go in a certain direction, they'd reach a certain point, and it didn't, or they did and it wasn't satisfying, right? They were led to believe that you get the right job and the right promotion and the right title and the right money and you got it made, and then they're like, no, that didn't do it for me. Like, is that all there is? Right? Or that they were following somebody else's path. They were doing the career and following the pattern that somebody told them they should. And they realized, no, this isn't for me. This isn't my life. Right. Um, so, and it can happen in your personal life too, that, what your family looks like can be very different than what you thought. And that could be because certain people aren't in your life anymore. Maybe they passed, or maybe they moved away, or you had a falling out, or you thought you'd have kids by this point and you don't, right? Or you thought you'd have grandkids by this point, you don't. Maybe you realize that you probably are not going to have kids or not going to have grandkids, right? I've had a couple of conversations with people about that in the last couple of weeks. Um, and so there's no like formal process for grieving in this case. There's no funeral or wake or sitting shiva, right? Burial for this kind of grief, this kind of loss, but it's real nonetheless, right? It's real nonetheless. That says the video is lagging. Um, yeah, it happens sometimes. I did the reset before we started, but hopefully it'll clear up. Um, and hi to you, Beth, and Chrysalis and Lynn as well. Good to see you. Um, and that's great. I'm glad it's resonating. Um, okay, so why else is this so difficult for us to acknowledge? Because a lot of this is really not even being able to acknowledge it ourselves and give ourselves permission to grieve for these kinds of losses, right? For this life that we thought we were going to have or we did have, and it's now holding us back, right? Because we spend so much time instead of thinking about where we are now, being grounded in the now, like in our meditation, and thinking about how I want to move forward and creating some kind of vision for moving forward. We're stuck in the past, right? With regret or resentment or shame or guilt or sadness, right? Grief about either what we had and lost or what we wish we'd had and didn't get and may not be able to get moving forward. And so we're just stuck in that instead of where am I at? How can I head forward? Right? So, what keeps us stuck with that past? One is that it kind of can feel ungrateful to acknowledge this grief, right? Because you feel like, oh, I should be thankful for what I have. And sure, yes, you should be grateful for what you have. And gratitude is a phenomenal superpower and it can change your mood in like 10 seconds. And it's amazing. Having said that, we often think that we can't hold two feelings in our hearts at the same time. And yet we can. It is perfectly fine and natural and can be very healthy to both feel grateful for what we have and to feel sad for what we've lost. We do it when people pass, right? If you've ever been to a funeral or a shiva or a burial, whatever, like that there are times where people are crying one minute and laughing the next minute, right? That they can be a time for grieving and for celebrating. And I'll get into this more about, you know, the reality of that duality, right? That you can experience both of these basically at the same time. Like, this is okay, but we feel like we shouldn't, right? That we just need to be grateful, but you can feel both, right? We also sometimes feel like it's a sign of weakness, right? That maybe I'm just not resilient enough. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Other people have it worse, right? So who am I to complain? Does that just show that I'm weak? No. Yes, it's true. There are probably other people on the planet who have it worse, and that can help you create a bottom for your grief, right? That you're not going to wallow too much. You're not going to go into some kind of spiral of grief because you realize this happens and it happens to other people. And there's some people who have it worse. Yes, you're right. Therefore, it's not the end of the world and everything is temporary, right? So this too shall pass. You will grow from this, right? And we'll talk about that this is actually an opportunity for growth. But you can still feel it and you can acknowledge it and you can go through a grieving and healing process for sure, right? So that's another thing that holds us back, but we need to remind ourselves that it's not a sign of weakness. People experience it and it's okay to and healthy to experience it. In fact, it's healthier to do so than to repress it, right? um, it also can feel sometimes like if we acknowledge this grief and the loss of this past life or the life we thought we were going to have, that it can feel like admitting defeat, that it's final, it's permanent. Um, and, we need to remind ourselves again, everything's temporary. And where we are right now is a starting point. No matter where you are, today is a starting point. And so, even if some past version of yourself or a version of yourself that you imagined happening isn't here now, and part of that may not be possible moving forward, even, that's okay, right? Everything is temporary. That is a part of life. And you can still grow and evolve and change in interesting and new and exciting directions from where you are right now, right? That's an important reminder, right? And then another reason why it's hard for us to acknowledge this stuff is that we don't know what to do with it because there's no script for it. Most of us never saw good role models. That we never were taught how to even notice when we're experiencing this kind of loss or grief, and certainly weren't told or shown what to do with it. In some cases, like my own, quite the opposite. My dad was a, suck it up and pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of guy. And though in reality, he suffered from tremendous depression and at times outbursts of anger because he wasn't acknowledging and dealing with exactly this stuff, right? And he had real stuff that he had to acknowledge and grieve for, and he did not ever. And it took a terrible toll on him emotionally and physically, right? And so we can't afford to do that. We can't afford to do that, right? Um, and if we don't deal with this stuff, it's gonna show up. It's gonna show up as bitterness, as cynicism, as numbness, right? Withdrawing, um, maybe even a vague sense that, like, almost like life is going through you rather than with you, or rather than you being a part of creating life. You just feel like you're the leaf floating down the river, right? And almost like an observer to your own life. If any of those things resonate with you, then it's worth looking at, like, what haven't I grieved for that I need to grieve for and learn from, right? Um, and it's important to remember too that grief is really like love that doesn't know where to go now. And what we need to understand is that acknowledging that love in the case of someone passing, right, for that person, or for this part of your life, right? You got married and you need to grieve for your single life, your single self, right? Because there are great things about that life, right? It doesn't mean you're not happy to be married, you don't love your partner, but you need to grieve for that other stuff because otherwise, what's going to happen is there's going to be resentment, right? And there's going to be second guessing yourself, and there's going to be anger, maybe even sometimes if you don't. And so we need to acknowledge that, yeah, well, I love that part of this. I love that part of my life. I love that dream. And why? And then learn from what the grief has to tell you, right? So let's get into this. Let's get into like kind of what this process kind of looks like, and we'll do it both in terms of like how it's a part of a natural stage of transitions in life, and some practical things that you can do to go through this process for whatever you need to grieve for, right? Just want to check in with the chat. Lisa says, I have both kinds of grief. My husband was put on hospice last week. I'm so sorry. So that grief is acknowledged, but my loss of life as I know it and being a full-time caregiver, I no longer even know who I am anymore. That is huge. For, as exhausting and demanding as being a caregiver is for a loved one who is ill or dying, after that period is over, right? In your case, because he's in hospice, like there is a loss of identity there, a loss of purpose that can be pretty profound. And it is entangled with that grief that you feel for the person. and in this case for the change in their life and the change in their health, right? And that's a transition as well. So that's pretty profound. And you're right, Lisa. You know, the grief for what your husband is going through and what you're going through with him, that gets acknowledged, right? We still don't handle it tremendously well in many cases, but it's acknowledged, and there are ways to create, you know, you know, routines and ceremonies to help you through that process. But for the loss of your life as you knew it, and the purpose and intensity of being a caregiver, no, we don't. So you have to figure out how to do that yourself, and with some support and help, which we'll talk about. But sending you a big hug, that's a lot you're going through, right? um, uh, and hello to fire as well. um, so okay. So I've mentioned the word transition several times. This is a transition. When there's something that ends, whether it was a part of your life, a phase of your life, a role that you played, a job, a marriage, a singlehood, um, you moved, whatever, there is an ending. Something ended. And when something ends, even if you wanted that thing to end, even if the thing that ended wasn't healthy or good for you, there is a loss there, right? That needs to be acknowledged. And a lot of times we don't, right? Particularly if it's something that we chose, right? And that we're happy about that thing ending, or relieved about that thing ending, and maybe even looking forward to what's next. There's a loss. And if we don't acknowledge the loss and heal it, grieve it, learn from it, then it's going to come back and bite us in the butt a lot of the time, right? So we need to go through that process. And there is, after the ending, usually a limbo period. There's a time between what ended and what's going to come next. Sometimes it can be a long time, months or years. We tend to not like the limbo because we don't like uncertainty and unpredictability, and so, but we need a paradigm shift on that, because the limbo is a really great time. That's where a lot of growth happens and a lot of learning happens, and where a lot of healing and grieving needs to happen. So don't rush it, right? And and that will inform us about what we want to start anew, how we want the new thing to begin, what we want that to look like. And we can go forward in creating the new thing with more intentionality and more wisdom, right? So there's three phases: something ends, the limbo, something new begins. And if we can go through with purpose and intentionality about the stuff that happens usually during the limbo phase, the in between phase, that allows us to grieve and celebrate and learn, then we can do better with the new thing, right? So let's talk about um, what this looks like, right? And I just want to check in the chat one more time before I get into this. Oh, and KP, yeah, stuff's on YouTube now because everybody was asking for this stuff. So replays are on YouTube, right? I've got talks on YouTube now. And I'm getting caught up. I'm in the middle of it. But thank you all for asking. Okay, so how can you go through this? Well, there are a couple of like basic steps, and you can do this. There's no right or wrong in terms of whether you do this through meditation, through journaling, through mindful walks in nature, with a therapist, with a life coach, right? Depending on your situation and what you feel like you need or what's going to help you best. Any of those, or in combination, can be the right medium for you, right? So no right or wrong with that. Um, but here are the very basic prompts, right? So it's pretty easy to remember and to do. First is, what do you actually need to grieve for? What's sad? What's lost? What are you sad has ended or is ending that you need to let go of, right? Acknowledge it, that you need to let go of it. right? That here's why I'm sad about this. Here's how much I loved this, or loved this person, or loved that situation, or loved that dream that I had. And here's why it's sad to me. Here's what I'm going to miss about that. And acknowledge it. Cry the tears, right? Feel the angst, right? But get it out, right? Write about it. You want to do voice notes while you're walking in the woods. You want to just meditate on it, but really sit with it, be present with it, right? You want to talk about it with a therapist or a life coach. Great, right? So the grief, what is lost, right? What you're sad about. Next, what you want to celebrate, what you're grateful for. It could be a divorce and it was a terrible marriage, but there were reasons why you got married. There were things that were great about it at times, probably, right? There were things about that person that you really liked and appreciated. Celebrate those things, right? Be grateful for them, right? The career that you had, right, that maybe came to an end or took a detour. What were the things you really liked about the career, right? And some of these things are going to be almost like the mirror image of what you're sad about. But this is a different energy you're bringing to this part. This is really trying to bring an energy of gratitude, and it's a great time to really acknowledge that the mirror side of the grief is really the love, right? That doesn't know where to go. Were you giving it a place to go? Gratitude. The love has a purpose now, so that helps ease and heal some of the grief too, right? That it can get channeled into this loving gratitude, right? And that's very, very healing, right? That's one of the most healing parts of this whole process. So you go through that. The next one, what do you want to learn from this? What can you take away from this? What wisdom does this ending, does this loss, this grief offer to you that you can use moving forward, right? And that also is very healing because it starts to shift our paradigm. That two of these three exercises, if you will, that we go through, right, are very positive and allow us to heal a lot. And therefore, they help ease some of the pain at times and moving forward of the loss, of the grief, right? And boy, it is a tremendous opportunity whenever there's any change in our lives to use that to create more change, more intentional change, more purposeful change. We don't want to lose that opportunity. We are more open to change in our lives when we're already undergoing some kind of transition or change, right? There's the old proverb, don't let a good crisis go to waste. That's what they mean. So really take advantage of this and figure out, what is it that I'm learning from this experience? What have I learned from whatever's ended, right? At any point during it. And how do I want to use that to inform me as I move forward with more wisdom, right? Maybe hard earned wisdom. So that's huge, right? That's a huge part of it. And again, like you can do those three things, in an afternoon. Maybe you want to go back to them and revisit them a couple of times. You could do them on different days or a couple of days apart each, whatever you feel like you have the energy for and what works for you, right? But I think it is worth, like at some point, maybe doing a little bit of writing as part of it, just because something different happens to our brains. We process differently. And it might be nice to have something to go back to refer back to at some point. But you don't have to do the whole process that way, right? Again, you can do it, therapist, life coach, journaling, meditation, mindful walking, right? Any of those, right? And then, this will then allow us to to let go, right? And to move on. Not that the grief ends at a specific date. My parents passed decades ago, right? 1989 and 1995. I still think about them every day. I grieve for them a little bit every day, but it's easier and it's different, right? And I've processed what I needed to process in those relationships and about those people and about who I was in each of those relationships, right? The good and the bad, and healed. And so it becomes easier. And I find it's easier to channel my grief more into gratitude, appreciation, right? A manifestation of the love today that I still have for them, that they're still with me, right? In powerful ways, in fact. So so I think that's a huge part of it, right? And you get to choose to carry this grief differently and carry it with you forward, right? There's a lot of people think like, oh, you got to grieve and then leave it behind you. No, like you take it with you, but you learn from it. It offers you wisdom, right? And it can continue to give you gifts, right? Even think about the life that you wish you'd had. There are elements of that that you can now go, "Who? What can that look like?" So, there are people who are like, "Oh, I thought I'd have kids by now." Do you still want to have kids? Do you want to adopt? Do you want to foster? Do you want to be more involved in the lives of kids of your friends or relatives? Is it, you're married to somebody now or partnering with somebody who has kids of their own and you're going to be a grandpa or a grandma to their grandkids? Do you want to volunteer with kids or do you want to volunteer with other people who are vulnerable? Like, whatever it is, you can take what it was you wanted in that life that you're grieving and figure out some new way to honor that. When I left teaching and running an innovative lab school, I didn't I knew intellectually, but I didn't realize in a practical sense how much I would miss the sense of community every day. Being surrounded by all these people that I loved and who loved me, and we were part of this like family. It was really a year out of working, here at home virtually with you all and with my clients, right? That I realized how sad I was and how much I missed that sense of community. And so I've had to find new ways, right, to honor that. So I grieved and celebrated, but I also said, okay, what of that can I find and create moving forward? So started going to yoga in person. I've got a nice little sense of community there, right? And I volunteer at a women's homeless shelter, and I've got a nice little sense of community there, right? I'm finding all these ways. I'm starting to do some public speaking like this, but in person to again create more of a sense of community and be with people in a physical sense, like more often. Um, that's what I'm doing, right? That's what I'm doing. Um, so it creates more opportunities to create the life moving forward that you really want and need, right? Um, Now, in some cases, you'll realize in doing these reflections that there's some deeper healing that needs to happen than just comes out of that initial session or two meditating or journaling or whatever. And so one of the ways and that's what one reason why working through this stuff with a life coach or a therapist can be really helpful, right? Because sometimes they might realize, oh, we got to go a little bit deeper here. Isn't this an area where you've got some more healing to do? One of the things that helps or has helped a lot of people, myself included, is writing a letter you'll never send. Because sometimes we need to have a mechanism, a medium for us to really let stuff out, to dig deep and feel the emotions and say the things that we've been holding back to ourselves, to somebody else, whatever it is. And this can do that because you commit to yourself up front, I'm never going to send this. When I'm done with it, I can read it over once, but then I'm going to shred it. I'm going to burn it, whatever. I used to have, if we were at a campfire, we'd burn these things Um, but you can shred it, you can throw it out, you can whatever you want to do. Be safe. But um, so, for instance, there was stuff I had to work through with each of my parents, and they were both gone. So I couldn't work through it with them. I wrote them letters, right? Where I worked through that stuff. I said what I needed to say and um, processed it, in the letters, and I threw them out. And it was cathartic because I got to finally say it and acknowledge it with myself. Read the words, hear them when I read it out loud. For the first time, to legitimize and validate how I had felt. To let go of the anger, to let go of the shame, the guilt, the resentment, whatever I was holding, to let it go because it had a place to go now. And again, you'd be surprised how cathartic that can be. Doesn't work for everybody, but for a lot of people it works, right? You can write it to your former self, right? Your single self if you're now married, or your 25-year-old self writing about the dreams that you had for where you'd be when you're 35 or 45 or 55 and you're not there. But grieve and say, look, I'm sorry, that's not the way it worked out, but here's how things did work out. And boy, these were good things that we didn't even anticipate. These are things we're grateful for now, right? And this is who we are now. And all that made us who we are. And who we are now is a unique, special, worthy person. And I'm going to use this to move forward in a way that has intention and gratitude and love deeply embedded in it, right? And that can be really powerful and healing, right? To acknowledge the grief, but also acknowledge the good things and have that energy pointing forward rather than backwards, right? But that can be really healing, right? So that letter you're never going to send, again, it could be somebody else, living or dead. It can be a past part of your life, an identity that you've lost, right? The caretaker, right? Right to the caretaker, right? Acknowledge the loss of identity, acknowledge the fatigue, right? There may have been resentment, who knows, right? Acknowledge it all, get it out there, give it space, right? Create space for it, validate it, let it breathe, and then heal it, right? So that you can move on, right? Fire says, this really has me thinking. I'm great. Crystal says, is it okay to keep the letter or do you have to destroy it to heal? I think two things to think about. One is you have to at least commit that you're never going to send it. That person is never going to see it. Otherwise, you'll hold back. You want to keep it if it's ironclad that that person is never going to see it and no one you want to not see it is going to see it. I suppose you could hold on to it. But there's something really healing about letting it go, right? So it's up to you, but I think that clarity of like, this is never going to see the light of day. I can write whatever is in my heart, my soul, my brain is going to go out here because I don't have to worry at all about anyone ever seeing this. That is what you want, right? Fire says, I did that yesterday when I said yesterday was the death of the old me, and I listed all the areas, and I wrote myself a birth letter where I start new. I love that. Love the birth letter idea. It's great. Fantastic. Listed death and put each area, all the things that died, and moving forward, I had a birthday. I think that's wonderful. Which was another letter which started yesterday. That's great. That's great. Questions, thoughts, pushback, epiphanies, any of it, put it in the chat, right? I'm sure somebody else is going to be like, oh, that resonates with me, or oh, I was thinking the same thing, or I felt the same way. And again, like to think about, where are the ways in which you may have repressed some of this stuff. This stuff is going to come back and bite you, right? We know the mind body connection. We know that repressed stress can lead to severe back and neck pain, right, and other symptoms, right? The body keeps the score, right? A famous book in the last couple of years. So we know that it can come out physically. We know certainly it can come out in terms of our mental health and fatigue and energy, right? Again, it can numb us, it can create resentments, anger. I had times where, um, you know, I am not a road rage person, but there were a couple of times in my life when I was young, like in my 20s, where I had road rage and it was repressed emotions, losses, grieving that I had not acknowledged. And it was only when I acknowledged it and was able to heal it that I was able to not have that happen anymore. Right? Same thing with lower back pain. I had the lower back pain that absolutely was repressed stress tied into grieving that had not completed, right? That I had repressed. And that involved a couple of different dimensions, right? Sometimes, when someone passes, and this was mentioned earlier, right? That there's the grief associated with that, but there are other pieces of grief that need to be acknowledged with that often we don't, right? Your role in life, your lifestyle, right? Um, there are things that aren't the same anymore, right? And we need to acknowledge that and grieve for that, right? Otherwise, again, it's going to fester and it's going to come out some way. And that's why, like, when you think about people who might poo-poo this, right? And say like, oh, you just got to deal with it and suck it up. Life sucks and it's difficult and you got to just move on. Underlying that, oftentimes, you can tell is some cynicism, some numbness, right? Some resentment that they haven't resolved. And acknowledging that it's healthy for you to address yours would mean they'd have to finally confront theirs. And they don't want to do that consciously or subconsciously. So they're going to poo poo you doing it for yourself. But you do you. You get to live your life, right? This is your life to live. And it's your body and your brain and your heart and your soul. And you've got to heal it and take care of it, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind, right? Um, Again, anybody got any questions or observations or reactions, pop in the chat. In the meantime, just a reminder that this live content is supported with donations from people like you. So if you found anything here resonated and you'd like to make a donation to support this kind of content here on Insight Timer, please make a donation. And then I hope you're following me. If you're not, please do. I've got a lot of meditations here. I hope you'll rate and review them. Thank you, Lisa, for the donation. And I've got a group here, Living with Integrity and Joy. I hope you'll join that. If you haven't already, I publish my Substack there, share some meditations. We're trying to create a little bit of a sense of community here, and that's free. And I've got a course here as well on living with integrity. It's a little mini course, gives you a little flavor of some of the work that I do with people. And people seem to like it. You can ask me questions and we can have a little dialogue going on there. So I hope you'll do that and rate and review that as well as my meditations. And again, I've got some new meditations up and more to come. So I hope you'll check those out and rate and review them. And let me know if there are topics for future sessions here or for meditations that you'd like me to include. Next week, I do these at noon Eastern on Wednesdays generally. And next week is on starting over isn't starting from scratch. And if you've been with me the last month or so, you'll see there's kind of a progression that I'm taking you through. And, it kind of makes sense that if we can heal what we're leaving behind, right, or what we lost or what we feel like we're not going to have anymore, that you can see like kind of the next step is like, well, then how do we want to move forward? And that to remind ourselves that starting over doesn't mean starting from scratch. It can feel like a rebirth, right? But it doesn't have to be starting from scratch. You are, as I talked about earlier, learning from what came before with deep gratitude for that learning and wisdom, hard earned as it might be, so that you can apply it moving forward. So you're not starting from scratch at all. This is just the new launch pad. That's all it is. But it's not starting from scratch. So that's going to be next week, right? And thank you, Lisa, or sorry, Lynn. Thank you, Lynn, for the donation as well as Lisa. Um, just a couple more comments that people had. Um, Fire says, my ego had kept the old me 2020, April to 2026 in fear. But once I realized that the last 6 years have gone, it made me realize intentionality is key. Yeah. And again, it's all about fear that holds us back, a lot of the time from going through these transitions in a healthy way. But we can learn from the fear and it can teach us maybe where we need some healing and how to be courageous and to be more intentional about where we're moving forward, right? Lisa says, my back is hurting now. I never even considered that it could be related to my grief. Um, so, yeah, I mean, and there's a book, I think it's called Healing Back Pain, but it was by uh, Sarno, Dr. Sarno at NYU, wrote it like 35 years ago or something like that. Lynn, thank you. Um, and I can tell you, I had been through horrendous lower back pain. I had a couple of herniated discs, but they did this study at NYU where they took people off the street randomly, gave them MRIs, interviewed them, and there was no direct correlation between the physical problems and the pain. There were people who had herniated discs with no pain and herniated discs with pain, and the reverse was true as well. And sure, sometimes your pain can be in part or all because of something physically wrong. But what they found was that sometimes part or all of the pain can be from repressed stress or repressed grief or repressed some kind of repressed emotional healing that hasn't happened. And I had been through every type of treatment for my back. Nothing helped. Started reading the book, realized, oh, that's me, repressed stress. I dealt with the repressed stress stuff, pain went away. Again, I've had other things where I needed surgery. So I'm not saying like it's always that, but it's worth thinking about, right? So they found that like individual and group psychotherapy brought tremendous results and improvement with people. Um, uh, Cynthia says, I did write letters to my parents, adoptive, uh, doing my fourth. Yeah, and that's great. I'm adopted too, so totally uh, relate to that. And good for you. Good for you. I hope it was helpful. Um, Fire says, uh, my friend, don't grieve the last 6 years. Focus that you have just moved here and be intentional with my goals, time, etc. Yeah, being intentionality, right? This is all what it is. It's about being present, mindful, intentional, right? Cynthia says, I guess it was fourth step in AA, but it was focused on my damaging them via behavior, but not in the manner you suggest. I think I need to write to both my birth mother and adoptive mother to release the anger. Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, yeah. And let me know. Reach out if you want to talk about how to go about that or need any help with that. Let me know. Yeah, and anybody, you can follow me and you can reach out to me through my profile here and DM me if you want to talk about any of this more. Um, yeah. So again, thank you for being here. Thanks for being a part of this wonderful community. And I hope this was helpful and resonated with you. Look forward to having you back here again next week. And again, don't be afraid to reach out in the meantime and definitely follow and uh, and and join the group here on Inside Timer, Living with Integrity and Joy. You can get to it through my profile. And yeah, so if I don't see you in the meantime, I hope to see you next week. And sending you all much love and gratitude. Thank you so much. Be well and be love, be loving energy. Right? Thank you. Thanks all, Rebecca, Cynthia. Thanks to everybody who participated in the chat. Made it so much better. So thank you all for that and for sharing and being vulnerable and authentic with us all here. Right? Thank you all.